The following Conscious Consumer Network recording of a live broadcast is available to purchase in high definition at ethymarket.com. Support free and independent media by becoming a CCN pledger. For €10 a month, you can have unlimited access to CCN high definition downloads at ethymarket.com. Ethymarket, the ethical marketplace for conscious consumers. Each life we incarnate into has a divine purpose. For the majority of people on this planet, their purpose has eluded them. We have become so distracted with the struggle to survive that we have forgotten what we are here to do. In alignment with the sacred laws of nature, the ultimate purpose of all existence is to create and evolve. We certainly do not incarnate into life with the intention to destroy. And yet, we have come to live in a very destructive world. As a result, there are many out there who feel lost or adrift, whilst knowing deep down inside that something is very wrong with their reality. Many people wish they could do something of value, anything that is purposeful, instead of having to submit to a system of slavery in order to survive. It is important never to let go of that feeling. That is your soul crying out to you, telling you that your life has value and that you do indeed have a purpose. The most important thing you can do in life is to recognize your purpose, and often that requires a lot of soul searching. Life indeed dishes out some pretty tough challenges, which will either move you closer towards your purpose path, or will give you great training for when you finally realize what it is that you came here to do. But more often than not, the very clues about your life's purpose are hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of our existence. But we are so easily distracted by irrelevant details that don't really matter, that often we miss the very obvious right in front of us. It is because of our willful ignorance of anything that does not fit our preconceived ideas that the truth about the nature of our reality is so readily hidden in plain sight. This is a very deep and personal journey, which has come to be expressed in many aspects throughout my life. This is not just an attempt to retell a bunch of research and pass it off as my own, for I am very grateful and openly acknowledge all the many wonderful people that I have been given the opportunity to work with and to learn from in order to get to the point where I've come to know what I now know. This is a journey I was always destined to go on, and likewise, how I have come to know this information forms as much a part of the story as the information itself. Good evening, everybody. My name is Melvi, and this is Dragonology. Tonight is episode 8, and it is the 14th of May, 2015. 9 p.m. in London and in Morocco, 10 p.m. here in Central Europe, and of course in my home country of South Africa, 4 p.m. in New York, and of course it's the next morning in Sydney, 6 a.m. there. So thank you to everybody who's tuned in tonight, and it's going to be an interesting one. As discussed over the last few episodes of Dragonology, episodes 1 through 7, and if you haven't seen them yet, please do yourselves a favor, go back and have a watch. We have systematically built up over the course of a few weeks some interesting material. And what we've tried to do is we try to link it each week so that we build up upon what we've learned the week before. And what I very much like to do as well within each episode is to try and keep each episode as self-encapsulating. So if this is the first time you've come into a Dragonology episode, welcome, and I hope you find this interesting. But for those of you who have been following on, most of this should be pretty well covered territory for you. However, what we're going to be doing today is kind of using what we've learned over the last few weeks to deconstruct what we've come to know as words and understand how they've been very much used for mind control and propaganda. And this is where we're going tonight, is we're going to be looking at the elements of mind control and propaganda, how it's applied through language, and how this basically ties into some very well-known historical examples, because it's all very good and well to talk about these things theoretically, but I think the most important thing to do is to give people practical demonstrations so that we understand exactly how we've been duped. Okay. Starting with Joseph Goebbels. He was the Minister of Propaganda in Nazi Germany. He said, "It would not be impossible to prove, with sufficient repetition and a psychological understanding of people concerned, that a square is in fact a circle. They are mere words, and words can be molded until they clothe ideas in disguise." Now, this is the premise upon which we're going to be approaching absolutely everything through the course of this evening, is to understand that words can be molded until they clothe ideas in disguise. And over time, they can be sort of changed and reinterpreted and shifted, so to speak. And perhaps this is what's happened a lot with language over the years. And this has largely been used as a mechanism of subterfuge in order to get us to shift the boundaries of our understanding of certain concepts until basically those concepts and understandings mean something else. For those of you who aren't familiar with any of my previous work, please go and read my book, The South African Guide to the Global Conspiracy, Book 1, Light and Dark. We have a chapter in there which basically deals with things such as the consumer con. And I myself am a former fashion stylist. When I lived in London, one of my clients was Coca-Cola. And yeah, it was always interesting when I started to work a lot with different brand labels, realizing how a lot of them come from the same suppliers, but with different labels onto them. And, you know, very much what distinguishes things under certain labels and what doesn't, what are, you know, what really categorizes something as that said thing. And the whole brand label deconstruction really started at that point in my life. And I've written about this extensively in my book. But deconstruction of labels is absolutely essential for us as human beings to decoding our reality and deconfusing ourselves from the confusion that's been deliberately put on us by the constant sort of moving of the benchmarks in terms of what the understanding of certain words are. There wouldn't be a need to constantly be rewriting the dictionaries and rewriting the law books if things stay the same. But as we as society evolve, and as the mind control and propaganda machine has evolved, and as the media machine has evolved, so have the meaning of words. And we're going to be looking today at what this means in a practical sense and
we really have climbed into etymology from the serpentine dragon aspect in past episodes, but tonight we're going to be looking at a few other things on a more grounded, rooted, day-to-day understanding that most people would understand just from their liaisons with the mainstream realm of media. Okay, taking an extract from Be Quick or Be Dead, Iron Maiden was certainly a group of musicians who I'd say had entered into the Faustian Pact. You need only look at some of their lyrics to understand that they themselves are pretty, probably engaging in cult rituals. You know, if you look at this album cover of theirs, it's, interesting. Anyway, to read this extract from Be Quick or Be Dead, the serpent is crawling inside of your ear. He says you must vote for what you want to hear. Does not matter what's wrong, so long as you're all right. Pull yourself stupid and rob yourself blind. Now, a really interesting book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross by John M. Allegro. A lot of very interesting allegory with regards to the magic mushroom being involved in Christian mythology, and that's perhaps another lecture which we should get into. But in this instance, a very interesting quote that's come from the book that deals with this particular realm of information, the subject. John M. Allegro says, "A written word is more than a symbol. It is an expression of an idea. To penetrate to its inner meaning is to look into the mind of the man who wrote it. Our way into the minds of ancient man can only be through his writings, and this is the province of philology, the science of words. We have to seek in the symbols clues to the thinking represented by spoken utterances." Much of what we've been taught as word or language is rooted or has evolved from earlier sources, interpretations, and translations. Many commonly used words are polymorphic and have multiple layers, interpretations, and renderings, and have meant different things to different people over the ages. Words and sounds have great power. Indeed, it is the very gateway for dragons, spirits, and other beings to enter our world. And since language as we know it is very different from where it first started, most people do not know what they summon or bring into them from the astral realms by using certain sounds, words, by using certain sounds, words, or phrases, and specifically those three things in combinations. And we don't know what those combinations, are doing necessarily to the ether around us. Okay. Now, this is especially from my dear friend Dee, if she is watching. We've spoken about the word thesaurus before, and we're going to take you into a breakdown of thesaurus in just a second. But for the context of this, I wanted to play this really sweet little clip that I found from the series Friends, which deals with the meaning of thesaurus. So I hope this works over the share screen, so bear with me. Can you hear it?
Mm-mm.
No?
Mm-mm.
Okay. I'm going to try something else just for a second. Bear with me because I've got quite a few of these in here. Right. Can you not hear anything there?
No.
Okay, no worries. I'll move on then. Basically, the word thesaurus originally originates with the ancient Greek meaning treasure. Okay, the word thesaurus originates with the ancient Greek meaning treasure. Now, what's interesting to notice, if you look at the word treasure and thesaurus for a minute, you'll notice that they have very much similar words and letters represented in the actual words. In fact, I think the only one that isn't represented in treasure is the H of thesaurus. Okay, so they're closely represented. And if you break the word thesaurus down, you've got several interesting representations. The THE, which we've spoken about before, is the representation of God. Like, for example, theology, theologian, theosophical, thelema, all a reference to God, THE. And then sauros is actually a Latin word for lizard. You think of Tyrannosaurus rex, which is rex meaning king, but Tyrannosaurus means like the titans, big, tyrannical, Tyrannosaurus, so it's a big tyrannical lizard. And then Sau is actually an Arabic transliteration of the word for light. And it's interesting that you have these three words actually making up the word thesaurus, because the Sau makes up sauros, which is not the first time you find dragons and light being linked. In fact, dragons are often represented by symbols of the sun, and you often see mother goddesses, or for example, various interpretations of gods holding flames and torches, so inextricably linked with light. And then, of course, dragons and gods inextricably linked. And the fact that they come up in this word shows the control that the dragons, gods, lizards, angels, demons, whatever you want to call them, what they have over our language, because the way in which words are represented in a thesaurus, say, for example, I wrote a letter and I wanted to find better words for a sentence in order to make it sound more, I don't know, fanciful. And I guess that's what I was trying to represent with the Friends clip, is that I might want to use bigger words to create, I don't know, a literary rich letter, for example. And if I said, for example, a man crossed the road slowly, I could look that up and try to find a better way to write that, and find, for example, the man meandered across the road, replace it with meandered, which is a slightly, you know, I think, better word, or makes a sentence sound better. But that would be the use of a thesaurus in a practical sense. That would practically be why you would pick up a thesaurus and you'd use a thesaurus to look at language, as for this purpose, to actually find words. It's like a word treasure box. It's digging to find the right words to enrich or enhance a sentence. The creative principle. The knowledge of the creative power of sound, words, writing, and language is largely a closely guarded secret by dragon-worshipping secret societies. And this is a lot of what they kept from people. Now, try to remember that there was a period of time called the Dark Ages where the Roman Catholic Church literally sucked writing and reading out of public circulation. I mean, mass burning of books. This kind of went on throughout history, constant destruction of documents and stuff. And I think there's huge amounts of original works which are hidden in the Vatican archives. I'd love to get in there, but it was very much forbidden to engage in certain things such as the representations of symbols and whatnot. And eventually when they realized that they couldn't stop people from using these things, they perverted it so that it lessened in power. And this is kind of how language has evolved, because if you think about it, most European languages have actually come out of Latin. We use the same Roman alphabet. And that isn't by accident. there very much has been an evolution and a changing of language for the purposes of manipulation, predominantly of our understanding and of our, in a way to get our unconscious acquiescence to certain principles which perhaps we would not willingly give our acquiescence to if we knew exactly what it is we were doing. In the Grecian mysteries, treasure is equated with sacred knowledge or intellectual riches, as opposed to perhaps being, diamonds and pearls. So that is what is seen as valuable in the Grecian mysteries. They don't really talk about treasure as being perhaps bank full of notes or gold coins. What is interesting to note is that this allegory is always represented in the form of the dragon guarding treasure. And of course, we deal with Tolkien many times through the course of the Dragonology series, because that man knew something, and he was trying to tell us through the allegory and symbolism of perhaps what I think is more likely satire than fairy tale, because there was certainly for me an attempt to represent certain truths, certain morals, which for me play out in many different distinctions in our present day. So, a dragon that guards treasure, that's a common theme, and it comes up again and again and again. Of course, it comes up in the recent series of The Hobbit, which recently saw its last trilogy conclusion. Beautifully done. And of course, going into the symbolic allegories now, we've dealt with the apple over and over again, but I'm working off an Apple now, Apple screen, and what would we do if we didn't have Apple editing software, and the ability to put out this knowledge? And this is, for me, when the Apple Corporation sort of used the Apple logo, what they were trying to represent is knowledge. For me, it's very clear. The apple of Apple Computers insinuates the apple of the Garden of Eden with the one bite out of it, which Eve probably took a bite of the knowledge, which is symbolic of sacred knowledge or occult knowledge, which very much, as we said, they tried to suck out of circulation. They were pushed out of the Garden of Eden. They were judged. All the themes very much tie in. And I've said this many times. We come back to the Garden of Eden many times because it's the genesis, it's the origin, the very much anchoring reference point when you're looking at dragonology. Now we climb a little bit into the etymology side of things, so we start to deconstruct the words and see where the groupings bring common reference and therefore common allegory. Treasure and tree. Okay, now the first few letters of treasure, okay, if you use T-R-E-A, could, A and E next to each other could actually just be tree, okay, because you do sometimes vowel sounds transliterate with each other quite a lot as language evolves, but wouldn't be incorrect in saying that T-R-E-A would say tree, for example, because in English language, when two vowels go together, the first one creates the long sound. So tree, treasure, and tree, okay, the words treasure and tree share a common root. And of course, we have the serpent in the tree, which is inextricably linked. Dragons are inextricably linked with trees. Always comes up. How many Ouroboros representations are found with the dragon and the tree? For those of you who saw last week's Dragonology, this will not be an unfamiliar picture to you. This is a picture I took inside a Roman Catholic church in Leiden, which is the home of the Bilderberg Group in Holland. And this is a dragon, it looks like, or a serpent with feet, but wrapped around a tree with what looks like Mother Mary or Virgin Mother Goddess, something holy because she's got the halo. But yeah, inextricably always linked with the tree, serpents and dragons and the tree. So that's always interesting to note. And here we start climbing in. This gets so funky. This is where we start climbing into how it's interwoven language, and interwoven tapestry. And we've dealt with some of this in previous Dragonology. So for those of you who've been through this, it'll be quite familiar to you. So a tree is also perhaps also known synonymous with the word plant. And a plant is rooted in the word pala para pio, a very common root. We have dealt with this many times in previous Dragonology episodes. So we'll illustrate that further in just a second. But plants are normally green because chlorophyll obviously is a green substance which reacts with sunlight to feed the plant, and that's how plant grows. The word green is rooted in the word gin, okay, which normally is spelled with a DJ. That's the original spelling of gin, and of course it evolved into the J-I-N-N, and then of course J-I-N and gene, and of course gin is origin, comes from this particular root, and gene is in genealogy, and genesis takes that root as well. So you're talking about the origins. So we've been down here before, but green is rooted in this gin root. And of course, we've dealt with this before, Plantagenet. The name Plantagenet contains two dragon root words, the plant, okay, because Geoffrey Plantagenet actually took the name Plantagenet from a woman called Palatine, who was also known as Plantina, and she was actually the sister of Melusine. So Palatine was also known as Plantina. It just depends on which texts you read. And yeah, she gave the word plant to Plantagenet. Okay, her name was either Palatine or Plantina, and obviously the Pala root comes in here. She was known by either name, the Pala root evident here, and that's where plant comes from. Now, again, we've spoken about the genet part of Plantagenet, which again comes from the gin root, because what Plantagenet is actually saying is from Plantina's genetics, from this Plantina's genetics. So from the gin or gene, gene root, you get as well origin comes from this root, and of course genetics or genesis, or as we see here, the gene. So he's saying Plantina's genetics. That's what Geoffrey Plantagenet, that's why Geoffrey chose the name Plantagenet. The Plantagenet dynasty kind of was rooted in the Anjuvian dynasty, which is where we've covered off Melusine from before. And the Anjou, A-N-J, A-N-G, is the root of angel as well, which is also rooted in Anguim or Angui, which is the biblical angels. So again, it all ties back into the dragon serpentine etymology. If you look at all the names of these royals and kings, and you start again to look at perhaps they are dragons, as David Icke has been telling us. Again, as you've already mentioned, Plantina or Palatine was the sister of Queen Melusine, and we've covered off Queen Melusine quite a lot. And depictions of Queen Melusine show her carrying the Holy Grail, which represents the dragon or holy bloodline, with a snake, which we see this quite a lot. The serpent on the grail, the serpent grail, and this little one has a crown on, meaning a royal serpent bloodline. Interesting. Now we go into things that perhaps are synonymous with each other in the basic symbolic allegories. What is a plant that we commonly come across in the Garden of Eden? Well, that would be an apple. And this is a Lucas Cranach painting. We've dealt with this one before, and of course we've dealt with one of our famous painters, Lucas Cranach, quite a bit in previous Dragonology episodes. And of course we've spoken previously about things that are synonymous with each other, and you talk about apples and pears, for example, as apples and pears. are normally are synonymous. In fact, there's a Cockney rhyming slang poem that talks about going up the apples and pears when they're referencing going up the stairs. So let's look at the word pair, and we've also dealt with this before. We're going to go a bit deeper into the word pair today, and I actually found a few clips and stuff, but I'm not sure if we can play them. But the word pair originates again with this pala, para, pio group root of words, which in turn is all dragon or serpentine etymology, pala, para, pio. And of course, we spoke about this already with the palatine and plantina. So dragon root etymology here, we're going to look at this root very carefully and some of the evolutions of it. So pio, as we spoke about in this root here, which is part of this triad root, pio comes off in different variations. Peer can either mean to look or see, which again brings in the occult and oculus group of words, which the eye symbolism is inextricably linked with the dragon. But peer, double-E-R, is actually the Dutch word for pear, which is the fruit we've just looked at here. All right? And this word, pear, sounds the same as this word, pear, even though the I is there, and that means two. And then you've got this pier, which can be a walkway that goes out into the ocean. It's also a name, and then you get Pierre Cardin, for example, would be a name. Pear, this would be, for example, pear would be a French way of writing pear. And then what is interesting, we've dealt with this before, is you start to look at the very common themes that turn up with these dragon beings, which seem to be able to appear and disappear at will or change shape. And in fact, the very words for the ability to sort of incarnate out of nowhere and disincarnate into nothingness has the root word, the serpentine root word in, appear and disappear. Very much like we've spoken about, the ability to change shape very much comes from these guys as well. And the serpent root word orth appears in the word metamorphosis, which very much describes its ability to change shape. So let's get a little deeper into this. We spoke already about the, meaning God, the turning up in various roots here, and it wouldn't necessarily be in treasure or tree, but treasure and tree are linked to three, and the Trinity is very important, and the would link tree to three and treasure. And then you've got, as we said, the the in theology, theosophy, and theophany. That has the feign root word from the god feigns, which is the root of phantom as well, theophany. Theophany, as we've already spoken about, is this quality, the ability to appear and disappear. So it's got the God root word and a feign God, which is the god's feigns, also the root of phantom. Phantoms can appear and disappear. And you talk about the theophany of the Lord, which is the appearance of God to man. It's in the Bible. You can look it up, a theophany. They've even got someone called Saint Theophania, okay? Now, traits specific to gods and dragons, we'll look at this again. Theophany or theophania is the ability to appear out of nowhere, and this is a painting by Peter Paul Rubens, also one of these very inculcated, indoctrinated secret society painters, and he actually, this is Zeus appears, this is the theophany of Zeus to Semele, which caused Semele to die. Now, the other interpretation of this is Jupiter raping Olympia. Now, at this stage, why Semele has died is because something has raped her, and then when it appears in its proper form, it scared her to death. This is the death of Semele. Because of theophany, the appearance of Zeus out of seemingly nowhere. Now, Zeus was the Greek version of what then became, under Rome, Jupiter, in this particular painting by Giulio Romano, and this one's from 1450. And what this one shows is a therianthropy, which is the changing of shape, okay, from one form of being to another. Normally, anthropy is associated with human beings as an anthropology, the study of humans. So God, human, okay, so the changing of shape from God to human, or the appearance of God out of seemingly nowhere, which would be a theophania. Okay, these are two things that are irreconcilably and inextricably linked with dragons. Okay, so one of the things that's very interesting is the pair symbolism turns up some very interesting places, but quite specifically in some lyrics. And we talk, why this is interesting is because I went to quite a bit of, did quite a bit of research this week on how song and rhythm and rhyme can reinforce mind control and reinforce patterns, the repetition of certain things. It's quite ritualistic in a way. And basically the 12 Days of Christmas is a good example of this. And when you sing the 12 Days of Christmas, the way you sing it is, on the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me a partridge in a pear tree. Then you go, on the second day of Christmas, my true love gave to me 2 turtle doves and a partridge in a pear tree. And then you go, on the third day of Christmas, my true love gave to me 3 French hens, 2 turtle doves, and a partridge in a pear tree. And then it goes, on the 4th day of Christmas, my true love gave to me 4 calling birds, 3 French hens, 2 turtle doves, and a partridge in a pear tree. So the whole thing is repeated, and it's kind of builds up in a bit of a pyramid. If you think about the way it kind of is an etheric pyramid, the way you're creating it, because you're doing 1 block, and then you're doing 2 blocks, and then you're doing 3 blocks, and this is what you're doing. You've created this pyramid, which, what do you have here? A pyramid shape in a pear. It's being created with a word you're saying. You don't realize the symbolic allegory of why it's done this way, okay? But also the pears mean something, and so does the partridge. The partridge has so much symbolic allegory attached to it. So apart from the fact that all the things referenced in here have a very distinctive, if you understand occult language, all of them have distinctive symbolic allegory. A lot of references to birds in this particular one, because birds and serpents are inextricably linked, okay, irreconcilably linked. So obviously from that respect, the partridge is linked, but also if you look up the partridge in a pear tree, the partridge is a symbol of the mother goddess and is very, very much linked with the moon and lunar aspects. Do yourself a favor, go Google partridge and see for yourself how steeped in Wicca and all sorts of partridge is. So the symbol of the mother goddess and the moon is the partridge. Okay, we go back. Okay, so that's what that represents at the top here. What would normally be up here? An angel with perhaps a halo, representing the feminine divine principle, the mother goddess. That would normally be the top of the tree. Or some people put a star on there. We always used to put an angel up there. But the pears represent, obviously, that serpentine etymology as well. So partridge in a pear tree. There's a lot more going on here. And of course, then doves are also, if you say the word dove in French, it's column, which has the colu root in it, which also colubra means serpent. There is just far too much to ignore. Now, French hens, you look at the basilisk. The basilisk takes on a bit of a cockatrice features, and basilisk is also kind of a dragon. 4 calling birds. Now, that just references any birds, and as we said, birds are inextricably linked with dragons. 5 golden rings. Well, you know, I don't know how many times we have to bring up Lord of the Rings. geese. Go look at the stories of Odette and some of the stories about these Faustian pacts where princesses turn to swans, and another one to watch, Lady Hawk, very much this kind of thing, and Swan Song linked into this kind of allegory as well. 8 milky maids, referencing fertility, 8 symbol of eternity, fertility and eternity are always brought into each other when it comes to rituals. 9 ladies dancing. Now, 9 ladies dancing, could that be perhaps the 9 muses? 10 lords are leaping, 11 pipers piping, 12 drummers drumming. Obviously now we're talking about the people attending ritual. So there's so much in there that we could pull apart, deconstruct, and put back together again. But, you know, the fact that this is even sung at Christmas, you know, one of the most obvious pagan sun tradition holidays known to man. In fact, if you guys have seen any of the Dragonology that we've been doing over the past few weeks, none of this should be of any surprise to you. Now, as I've already spoken about, I did want to try and play some of these. So let me give this a bash again and see if this one perhaps plays and if we have any luck with this. Can you hear that?
No.
Can you hear that?
No.
Yeah? Can you hear that?
Very softly.
Okay. Where did that go? Beg your pardon. What I was trying to represent here, I'll try this again.
Very softly. No.
No? Okay. What I'm representing here is the power of song as part of the cultural identity and behavior. Okay? And you see a lot of what we've seen in Africa, these collections of people, you know, running through the streets, singing songs. Some of them don't even know half the time what they're singing. They just sort of get into it. And it causes them sometimes to do stupid things like riot and destroy a public property and vandalize things because they get into this kind of rhythm. Even the kids, they don't even know half the time what they're singing. But you get indoctrinated at schools, for example, and in these group meetings, it's very popular. See, ANC here, for example, it's very much part of the cultural identity and the indoctrination that exists. And as we say, the power of song, the power of repetition as, you know, part of developing certain aspects. And here we've got Nelson Mandela. When he came out of prison, they're singing here, and they've actually got the lyrics up here. Go safely, Mkhonto weSizwe, which was the armed wing of the ANC. Okay? And it says here, we are members of this armed wing, the MK. And it says, we have pledged ourselves. They're singing this. And there's a white guy here singing this. The Amabulu, to kill the Amabulu. We, the members of the MK, have pledged ourselves to kill them. The Amabulu. Bulu, that's an interesting word. We'll talk about it. Go safely in Mkhonto. Okay, that's the armed wing of the ANC. We'll talk about them again just now. Mkhonto weSizwe. We, the members of Mkhonto weSizwe, that's what MK stands for. We have pledged ourselves to kill them. The Amabulu whites. Okay, that means whites. Bulu means whites. Notice here how similar the word Bulu is to the word bully. And that is not by accident. The word bully actually originates in the word Bulu. Now, this is really an indication of how certain concepts have crossed continents, okay? White colonialists were referred to as the Bulu or the bullies, okay? Think about what we've come to know as the bullies. Bullying in school where kids get picked on. This is what native cultures came to see the whites as the Bulu. Now, I went to Indonesia last year, and Biggie is 6'6", and the Indonesian people there named him Bula, the Bulu or Bule, okay, which means big white man, okay? That's what they reference, the big white man. Now, the Indonesians are tiny people, okay, compared to the Dutch people who would perhaps be big, tall white men who, you know, actually colonized parts of Indonesia, enslaved a lot of these people. And, you know, although they left minimal infrastructure, hardly enough to actually up the quality of life there. Poverty was just quite a bit going for Indonesia. But what was interesting to notice was that even in the Indonesian language, they use the word that's being used in Zulu, okay? Here, this is a Zulu song being sung using the word Amabulu, meaning the white people, the whites, Bulu, referencing the white colonialists. It's the same word used, and it's kind of like how we would perhaps use honky or as a derogatory or dismissive word for a white person. I won't use the native dismissive words because I think it would just reflect poorly on me considering I am of European descent, but that is sort of like a word they use as well in Indonesia, bule, and the same as the Zulu bula, bulu, means white people or, you know, bullying white people. Bully comes from this word. That is the root of the word bully. It comes from the white people, the colonialists, who did a lot of damage, a lot of terrible things back in the day. But of course, next generations are paying for it, as I'll go on to discuss. The result of the mind control and a lot of this killing and stuff that's going on has resulted in what has become a pernicious genocide raging in my home country, which is just so violent and so extreme that it's gone beyond what we can just write off as black on white or white on black crime. I don't believe that there's that much hatred in people just because someone is a skin color. For me, what I've come to understand about the way the world works is there is a very deep, pernicious plot going on, and a lot of inculcation and indoctrination of people into cults. And these cults encourage ritual murder and killing and violence and bloodletting. War is mass ritual. The Holocaust was considered a mass ritual. You look at where some of these attacks happen on energetic vortexes and grids. It's all about maximizing the trauma and the drama and keeping us in the sphere vibration. And that's all done through cults, and South Africa is not short of cults, let me tell you. Even as a kid, I remember young girls being abducted and used in satanic rituals by people who then were well-known Satanists. So it's always been there. It's kind of been simmering beneath the surface for many years. And we looked last week at a number of aspects which tie into this. For example, that the Jesuits control all the orders all the way down, even the nightly orders. And the Jesuits basically, as we spoke about last week, the IHS acronym in the sun symbol references Isis, Horus, Seth, which is the Egyptian Holy Trinity. And they control everything, all the various orders, the mafia, the international bankers, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Illuminati, all the night orders, all the secret societies, the New Age movement, all religions, absolutely everything that has to do with control comes through them. All the night orders, as I said, including the night order, which is the Knights of Malta or the Knights of St. John, which Nelson Mandela is a member of. Here you can see a picture of him when he was much younger. Here when he was a bit older, looking a little less happy, probably realizing as he got older what he had gotten himself involved with. And of course, you can see him in his night robes on a South African stamp. So, you know, they didn't hide it either. They're just not very honest about what these knightly orders get up to. And of course, beloved Archbishop Desmond Tutu is also a member of these knightly orders. Thabo Mbeki, the Prime Minister that came, the President that came after Nelson Mandela as head of the African National Congress, or the ANC, is also a Knight of Malta or a Knight of St. John. And of course, one of the knightly orders, alongside the Knights of St. Malta and the Knights of St. John, that is controlled by the Jesuits, is also called the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. And so let's have a look at what these guys do, because they still exist to this very day. And as you can see, they very much go on religious doctrine, because you can see there Jesus Saves in the background. So very much a religious Catholic Church order. But you can see them, I beg your pardon, in their sort of knightly robes, okay, in the pointed hat-like, wizard-like, Mithrandia-like caps. We've gone over the Phrygian caps previously, and that's probably an evolution of them. Now, what do these guys like to do? The Knights of the Ku Klux Klan like to... Black people were burned for entertainment, and you know, they like to sometimes put them on crosses. I think this guy on the left-hand side, this is probably after he'd been on the cross for a while and they brought him down. But yeah, just a nasty bunch of people for the purpose of, or for the sake of having more melanin under the skin than, say, for example, another person, that being the crime, they get themselves tortured and burnt, you know. But this is all hatred inspired from within the Catholic Church. Very racist bunch of people, although they do have a number of black bishops and cardinals and stuff now. You've got to understand this pernicious malevolence that was directed against certain racial groups, and in fact against other religions, this total intolerance and hatred perpetrated through the Crusades. It's all rooted in the same freaking place. It all comes from the same root. And today this stuff still goes on. Okay, and I've used this family here, a modern day Ku Klux Klan family who are very proud members. Still, you can see the flaming cross being in the background. And this is the kind of thing that's typically an image associated with these guys, with their hoods and the flaming crosses. And you think that that's a satanic order, but it's actually Ku Klux Klan are controlled by the Roman Catholic Church. But then again, they control all cults because the Jesuits control the Vatican. And the Vatican is essentially, although parading around in a very thin pseudo-veneer of respectability, they are anything but that. And in fact, the fact that they have something called Crimin's Solicitationis, which is a law that protects child raping priests, that for me is indicative of the kind of organization, institution that they really are. Now, we've got to look at the reality of what this kind of indoctrination and hate seeding does. It creates irrational cult groups and cross-identificational hatreds. People seeing the other as the enemy. We look at each other as the enemy instead of seeing who the real enemy is, okay? And over here, I've used an example of this guy here, Eugene Terblanche. And he's got behind him what looks like what could have evolved from the Nazi flag, because he ran the very right-wing Afrikaner group called the AWB, which basically, I think he was he was involved in some kind of cult. He must have been. Very extreme religionist. And, you know, he was eventually beaten to death on his farm. But he was used, I think, to create a lot of hatred, a lot of animosity, and he and his people perpetrated a lot of violence towards the black people of South Africa and caused a lot of this hatred. And this is that the hate seeding is absolutely necessary in order to create the violence that comes with the destabilization of countries. Okay, and these guys are very much often funded by intelligence units such as the CIA, such as we see going on with things like ISIS and with Al-Qaeda. It's very much the case with this guy here. And when he was no longer useful, you know, he just killed him, kind of thing. But what that he ended up doing, because of all, you know, the extremist Nazi propaganda that came through this guy here, Eugene Blanche, he ended up having a whole generation of black people that wanted to kill farmers because he was a farmer essentially. And yes, he did end up getting beaten very, you know, to death, very badly killed in a violent way. You have a lot of people saying, kill the farmer, kill the boer. Now, boer is just a Dutch word for farmer, okay? This is the kind of stuff that was coming up at mass protests and gatherings. A lot of, you know, propaganda-seeded hatred. This is the result, people. This is the result. An unfortunate and devastating amount of very violently, brutally murdered farmers. Some of them not even farmers. Carjackings, all sorts of unfortunate things. And I'm not going to sit here and go over the horrors of the world. You know, I think they're on the internet. You can look them up if you're really into the gore. But this is a memorial, Plaasmoord. Plaas meaning farm and moord meaning murder. And this is the Plaasmoord Memorial in South Africa, which I think speaks volumes in and of itself. But this is the result of all of this hate seeding and violence. And when you get rid of all the farmers, you get rid of the food. And when the food's gone, what then? They're trying to depopulate Africa. And it's being done by manipulating the people of Africa to kill off each other. What the vaccinations aren't killing off, we're doing to each other, kind of thing. So we kind of have to wake up and realize that, you know, whilst we constantly flying at each other and fighting amongst ourselves, we're feeding into the dark agenda and doing exactly what they want us to do. Racism, religionism, even political dogmatism, you know, communism and socialism or whatever, any ism, all just concepts put upon us to get us to buy into certain ideologies and invest so much in them that we are willing to fight, in fact, kill people who oppose them. And we need to question what these ideologies are really all about, what these things really mean. What is it really that we are fighting for, that we are fighting each other, that we are killing each other over? They're mere words. They're words that cloak concepts that half the time mean something completely different to what we are sold. And this is the result. Dead farmers in our home country. And it's not okay. It's not okay, people. It never gets easy to look at this, to understand just how violent this killing has become. Understand that the kind of killing that's going on now, you see a lot of this sort of thing, where people are burnt with Bibles on them, where they leave rubber skeletons pinned up outside the houses, where they have taken crosses off the wall and stabbed them through people's hearts and vaginas and stomachs, disemboweled them, you know, smeared the walls with blood. All of this is cult ritual killing. This is seeded from the cults that are controlled by the Jesuits. All of this. This is where it's coming from. The genocide of white South Africans, particularly the farmers, is being perpetrated in a ritualistic way. Why? Because those perpetrating the killings are inculcated, indoctrinated, and trained by cults. For anybody wanting to learn a little bit more about this, feel free to go and read my book, The South African Guide to the Global Conspiracy, Book 1, Light and Dark. The link is available on freedomcentral.info. It's on the home page. It's a free ebook, so please download and read for yourself. All right, here's some controversial territory. Right. Mind control and the use of words in relation to the South African political and cultural landscape can be largely illustrated by an in relation to and in application of the term known as apartheid. Okay, let's have a look at what this word really means. Okay, what was apartheid really all about? Because people think it was about freeing black people. Okay. Being anti-apartheid was supposedly about freeing black people. That's the concept we were sold. Apartheid simply means the status of being apart or self-development, separate development, okay? The intent, okay, is the preservation of culture of the native people. That was the intent behind apartheid. That was why it was initially developed. Self and separate development was developed with the intent to preserve the cultures of the native people. The word was manipulated to mean racism and disrespect for native people, which for me is the complete opposite. So let's look at why separate development, okay? Why apartheid? Due to the way that the indigenous cultures had been indoctrinated out of their cultural heritage by the British and European-speaking colonialists, separate development was developed as a policy of cultural respect and preservation. So do yourselves a favor if you haven't gone and done a bit of research on what went on in Indian residential schools, particularly in Canada, okay? Mass native indoctrination. Little kids would be kidnapped by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, okay, agents of the Crown, the British Crown, kidnapped from their tribal homes, taken to schools, and they were beaten, some of them to death, if they spoke their native language. They were taught to read and write and were only allowed to speak English. And they were taught from the Bible. All these Indian native residential schools were largely run by the church. And the death rate in the schools was as high as 60 to 70% in a lot of them. And quite traumatic and terrifying. There's a lot of testimony out there about what went on in these schools. And yeah, I mean, that's what went on in Canada, which, as we said, was a colony of the Crown. And in fact, Canada is still considered owned by Britain. Now, another place that's considered to still be owned by Britain that still recognizes the Queen as their sovereign is Australia. And in the mid-1960s, a census was done. And the natives, what was called the Aboriginals, which actually in the more proper term would be the original people of Australia. The original people of Australia, okay, the darker skinned people of Australia weren't even counted as human. They were considered lower than animals. They were counted as fauna and flora in a national census, okay? So this is the state of affairs with regards, just as recently as the 60s, with regards to the Crown, the British Crown's attitude towards native affairs in their colonies. They were indoctrinating natives, kidnapping kids, forcing them into church-run boarding schools, forcing them to learn the language of the white man, the European languages, all right? And this was happening in South America, all right? And South America, they instituted communism 200 years before they even did it in Russia, and it was done through the Roman Catholic Church. So all of this indoctrination and stuff was going on with the natives of various lands through the church, through colonialization. And separate development was basically developed as an antidote to that, which basically was a way to preserve cultures in colonized lands, which was what was trying to be done in Africa. It was about the preservation of indigenous cultures, allowing them to have their own space where they could practice their own heritage, speak their own language, run their own courts, run their own judicial systems, run their own governments and parliaments. That's what separate development was about. That's what apartheid was really about, set up, okay? Now, the way they did this was through doing something called Bantustans, okay? Bantu is the collective word for the native people of Africa. The Bantus were given basically what was considered self-governing plots of land, which were traditional tribal homelands, okay? And they were massive tracts of land. So let me take you through this map here. Some people think that they were, like pushed into tiny pieces of reserves like you've got in Canada and America. No, these were massive tracts of land. Everywhere where you see color here is what was considered Bantustans. Now people will go, I beg your pardon. People would say, what about all this area here? Well, if you don't know South Africa, you wouldn't know that this is largely uninhabitable. It's what we call the Karoo. It's a bit like desert. You've got one town in the middle of the Karoo called Beaufort West. And the only thing that's great about Beaufort West is our first heart surgeon, Chris Barnard, was born there. It's literally a one-horse town with a dead horse. So that's, I may be completely wrong. Sorry to anyone from Beaufort West who may be tuned in, but this is largely desert. You cannot live here. Okay, so it's not like we gave them places that were uninhabitable. No, they were given massive tracts of land along prime coastal regions. Let's, for example, look at Natal. Okay, Natal's this area here where the blue is. Durban's there. That's where I grew up. Okay. The blue area is covering, I'd say, a third of the whole of Natal. And that's all traditional tribal land, Zulu land, okay? The home of the Zulus. And they were given as what we call Bantustans. Look at this here. There's a massive orange piece, which we reference as the Transkei, okay, south of the border of Natal. It's a massive, massive country, the Transkei. Now, if any of you ever visit Cape Town, decide to drive up to Durban, I highly recommend you do the garden route, and you would then be able to drive up through the Transkei and see for yourself just how huge this country is. It's a state within South Africa now. I don't think it's considered its own country, but the Bantustans were supposed to be self-governing country-like states with their own judicial systems, their own infrastructure, their own hydroelectric power stations, their own building of dams, absolutely everything of that nature, okay? Now, it's a pity I can't play these videos. I should have actually, I beg your pardon, I should have checked them before I came on to see if we could play it through Zoom, but what you're able to see from if you go through the archives, and I have done, I've spent a lot of time going through the archives and seeing who said what and who did what over time. Let me see if I can actually get from this on here. Tell me if you can hear it.
Nope.
Bear with me, there's no sound yet. Should come through now.
Nope.
Can you hear?
Very softly. Almost possible to hear.
Okay. Well, basically, this is a speech being given by Dr. Verwoerd, the 7th Prime Minister of South Africa until his assassination. And Dr. Verwoerd basically is talking about giving self-governance to the Transkei. All right? He has agreed to give self-governance to the Transkei. This is what apartheid is really about. It's giving them self-governance. All right. Now, this policy of self-governance of Vavut, of Bantustans, wasn't popular with the international community, because what it meant was that there were huge parts within Africa where people would be outside the clutches of those who controlled the Reserve Bank, which was set up in South Africa, I think it was in 1914. And of course, they wouldn't be taxable if they were within these Bantustans, because it would be considered totally different countries. There were no central reserve banks within these Bantustans. There were no ways in which to control the people through taxation. So, of course, this created safe havens within South Africa. And this Dr. Verwoerd, he also encouraged businesses, international businesses, to divest or divest from South Africa and invest into these countries and help them grow. This policy was not popular with the United Nations and the international community, hence why they assassinated the guy. But, they tried to kill him twice, okay? First time they shot him was at the Rand Easter show. They always like to do it. Easter's a great time for assassinations because it's ritualistic, you see. And they managed to pierce his cheek and his ear. But he was eventually assassinated on a lovely ritualistic date, 6th of September, 1966. And his funeral was held on the 11th of September, 1966. How's that one for you? Anyway, the interesting thing is, now I'm just going to get this up here. This guy here, Chief Matanzima, this guy, got an interview with him. And do yourself a favor. Go watch my film, The Last of the Boers, all right? It's on YouTube. You're welcome to check it out. And you'll see this interview here with Chief Matanzima. Let me just, Chief Matanzima, Daliwonga Matanzima, okay? Kaiser Daliwonga Matanzima was the nephew of Nelson Mandela. In other words, they were family, all right? And if you listen to this interview of this guy, I just love him. He's very charismatic, very well spoken. He is a judicial officer, okay? Incredibly intelligent man, as well as being the chief of the Transkei. And you hear him saying, we have everything we need to have a completely self-sustaining Transkei. We've got the building of hydroelectric power station, a completely independent judicial system. In fact, Kaiser Daliwonga Matanzima, the nephew of Nelson Mandela, was very much pro-Bantustans, pro-separate development. In other words, controversially, Mandela's family was pro-apartheid, okay? And this is something they do not teach you in the history books. Hendrik French Verwoerd, a man who gets absolutely relegated to scorn and hatred by everybody who gets taught modern day history in school. He gets plastered and labeled as, a very bad man, basically, because of the fact that he didn't follow through on the Jesuit plan for South Africa. He decided that he was going to do the right thing and the fair thing, which was to allow these natives to develop their own culture and their own language. As he says, the white people of Africa have developed their very own unique adaptation. We have our own adaptation to Africa, but very much the native people of Africa have the same unique adaptation, and we can learn from each other and respect each other. And apartheid was best seen as a policy of good neighborliness, is how he described it, where we respect each other's cultures as opposed to one trying to dominate the other. And that is what apartheid was initially all about. And he was one of the architects of the initial policy. And we'll see how it got twisted. But this is what was so great about Dr. Verwoerd. His main achievement was that he became prime minister, okay, on the 2nd of September, 1958, right? During the time that he was prime minister, South Africa was declared a republic. Now, this is huge, people, because South Africa went from using the British pound to having their own currency, all right? And from being a supposed British state or British colony to being an independent colony. Now, Whilst they still have a central reserve bank that is controlled from the powers outside of South Africa was never free. This was just a massive, epic rebranding and relabeling exercise. But what was interesting to note was that during the, whilst Prime Minister Verwoerd was the Prime Minister, okay, Queen Elizabeth II was stripped of her title as Queen of South Africa, and South Africa was rejected from the Commonwealth, largely because of its internal policies about separate development and allowing the Bantustan, the policy of the Bantustans, to continue under what became known as apartheid. The international community didn't like it, so they took the word apartheid and turned it into something that was dirty. And this is how words can be manipulated to mean something else. Now, Dr. Verwoerd's policies were so popular that economic growth by 1965 was the second highest in the world at 7.9%, and interest rates were absolutely the lowest they had been at 2.2%. But Verwoerd's policies were so popular abroad that even his staunchest critics admired his leadership in South Africa. During the time, this is interesting as well, during the time that Verwoerd was Prime Minister, the Jesuit/communist-controlled group known as the African National Congress, or the ANC, were banned in South Africa. And their leader at the time was Nelson Mandela, and he was put into jail for 27 years. And that was in 1964, whilst Verwoerd was still Prime Minister. Now, let's have a look at who Nelson Mandela was, shall we? Because he's obviously praised as a national hero. Nelson Mandela was head of Umkhonto we Sizwe, or MK, as you saw by that video where he was singing, which basically was the terrorist wing of the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party. At Nelson Mandela's trial, he pleaded guilty to 156 acts of public violence, including mobilizing terrorist bombing campaigns, which planted bombs in public places, including Johannesburg railway station. Many innocent people, including women and children, were killed by Nelson Mandela's MK terrorists. And some of the highlights are the Church Street West, Pretoria, on the 20th of May, 1983, a Mamsentoti shopping complex. A friend of my family was involved in that on the 23rd of December, 1985. Krugersdorp Magistrates Court on the 17th of March, 1988. Durban Pick and Pay shopping complex on the 1st of September, 1986. Pretoria Move It complex on the 16th of April, 1988. And funny enough, the Limpet mine actually killed one of the terrorists instead. Johannesburg Magistrates Court on the 20th of May, 1987, and Roodepoort Standard Bank on the 3rd of June, 1988. So this is all terrorist bombings perpetrated by the Umkhonto we Sizwe, which was the armed wing of the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party. Okay, so Nelson Mandela was a killer. he ran a killer terrorist organization that killed a number of people. Amnesty International basically are a group which help political prisoners in their pleas, and although they're just a puppet of the Illuminati, like the very thinly veneered Red Cross. I won't get into my soapbox about Amnesty International tonight. We'll do that another time. But what is interesting is that what is very telling is that Amnesty International did not only refuse Mandela, Mandela refused to renounce violence, okay, because bearing in mind he was the head of an organization which perpetrated a lot of violence. So he refused to renounce violence, and Amnesty refused to take his case, stating, the movement recorded that it could not give the name of prisoner of conscience to anyone associated with violence, even though, as in conventional warfare, a degree of restraint may be exercised. So this is why Amnesty International did not take on Nelson Mandela's case, because They could not give Nelson Mandela the title of prisoner of conscience because Nelson Mandela refused to renounce their use of violence. Now, interestingly enough, for the crime of putting a violent terrorist in jail for 23 years, for trying to give the blacks their own independent, home-run, independent, self-run, self-governing states in the form of the Bantustans, and by encouraging foreign investment into these self-governing, self-running states, which were outside the clause of taxation and outside the clutches of the central bank or the Reserve Bank. Dear President Verwoerd was stabbed to death in the House of Congress by a uniformed messenger by the name of Dimitri Suspenders, who was a half-black, half-Greek immigrant to South Africa, who apparently was, I'll get into it in a second, but Dimitri Suspenders said to have had, he claimed that a worm inside his body told him to stab President Verwoerd, Prime Minister Verwoerd. Okay, interesting. Now, another word for worm is dragon. We've covered this off in previous Dragonology episodes. So Dimitri Suspenders was basically part of a cult called the 2x2 cult, and looks like he may have been actually seeded with some kind of entity which spoke to him and told him to kill Verwoerd. And what was interesting to note was, supposedly, considering that when you listen to the stories about Suspenders being from an impoverished family, Suspenders' family, Suspenders' lawyer actually said that he was well-traveled and spoke 9 languages. Now, if he was supposedly one of the people who slipped, one of the white people that get perpetrators slipping through the cracks, and that's why he was upset with Verwoerd and the reason why he killed Verwoerd, how is it that he learned 9 languages and was so well-traveled? Well, the reason for that is because he was probably being trained as an agent. And this is, and in some way, there's so much evidence here regarding Suspenders and how he was basically set up as probably, not unlike Lee Harvey Oswald, to some degree, be a patsy and kill President Verwoerd. But what's interesting to note, and where you can see that there's absolutely Jesuit involvement, is the fact that they refer to what happened to Prime Minister Verwoerd as an assassination. He was assassinated. Anything that's given the title assassination means it's been committed by an agent of the Vatican, someone who's been trained by the Assassin Secret Society. All right? You don't give a killing the title assassin, okay? That's a very sacred title belonging to a secret society of assassins. That's Jesuit controlled. So that's how we know Kennedy, his assassination was ultimately linked to Cardinal Spellman, who was a Jesuit agent. Just like the assassination of Verwoerd was done through Jesuit assets, it's all linked. Now, I would love to have shown you this video. Let's see how this one pans out and if I can get anything going on here. But what we have is this lady over here, and it actually is in Afrikaans. It's probably better that I narrate it. Now, this was Dr. Hendrik Verwoerd's personal weapon that he kept on his body, right, that you see this lady handling. And this is a photo of Dr. Verwoerd, okay? Now, what you have here is a group of youths being asked in the street, okay? This video shows the ignorance of the brainwashing in South Africa. Dr. Verwoerd was killed, okay? And he never killed anybody. And these kids here say that he killed people and that he used the word kafir, which is a derogatory word for black people. I don't think Dr. Verwoerd ever used that word. In fact, he went out of his way to try and preserve native cultures by creating the Bantustans, which were self-governing homelands. So, you know, some of his best friends were black people and would have described Dr. Verwoerd as the complete opposite of racist, you know. And This is one of the comments that actually came off of this video that I've put up here. It says, and whoever says apartheid was wrong should back it up. Why was it wrong? People have an idea about apartheid, that it was immoral, oppressive, etc. But when asked to prove it, they're silent. That is because the ANC communist propaganda only stretches so far that it gives people impressions about apartheid that with no further evidence or argument. And that is why Black people think Dr. Verwoerd is a villain. They've been told false stories about him, but have been given no evidence. All right, and you hear them saying, these Black kids saying that he killed people and that he was disrespectful to Black people, and that is not true. But you can't actually hear it in this particular video. But I was hoping to perhaps show you the knife. Yeah, you can actually, over here, see this lady handing the knife. This is in the police museum in Pretoria, I think. And this is the knife that killed Dr. Verwoerd. So the anti-apartheid movement started to shape up. After they got rid of Verwoerd, they were able to take the word apartheid and turn it to mean something dirty, right? Support the struggle against apartheid. Suddenly apartheid became a bad thing and you had to struggle against it. Join the anti-apartheid movement. You don't want to be pro-apartheid. The cool thing was to be anti-apartheid. We started seeing this kind of imagery showing up, propaganda. And of course, British actors, the thespians, always getting in on the act. You know, these guys are used to push the propaganda of the politicians. That is why they exist, if nothing else. British actors protest apartheid. British actors protest anti-apartheid movement. Release South African prisoners. Never mind that they're terrorists. International propaganda against apartheid. Okay, and all of this was about boycotting and boycott South African goods and isolate South Africa. All this kind of stuff started hitting the international mainstream press. Rallies were held to support South African freedom fighters. And this is where you start having anti-apartheid, the word anti-apartheid being equated with freedom. Because suddenly we've got a free Nelson Mandela, and then everything will be okay, because then we'll be anti-apartheid. And that will happen with the freedom of Nelson Mandela. And then everyone in South Africa will be free, which is a load of crap, really, because Nelson Mandela was freed. He became, here's Nelson Mandela in his Knight of Malta outfit. Here's free Nelson Mandela. And the reality is South Africa is worse off after the presidency of Nelson Mandela than it was before. Yeah, but he's free now, and apartheid's over. But what about us? What about South Africa? Instead of bridging the very large divide between poor and wealthy, the African National Congress government adopted policies that exploded poverty, inequality, and crime. Look at this little guy here in his torn clothes. It's heartbreaking for me to see little children with shoes that their feet are busting out of because it's broken, dirty because they've got no clean water to wash from, never mind drink, living on this kind of filth because there is no organized refuse disposal in these impoverished areas. It's sad to think that children grow up like this. No wonder they've grown up hating other people for being a different skin color, for being richer. Look into the eyes of this little guy. What do you see? Africa has been deceived. And very telling in this picture, you see this guy holding a sign here saying, "Where is the better life you promised us?" Because it was promised and it was never given. Malcolm X said, The media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and make the guilty innocent. And that's power, because they control the minds of the masses. And of course, never mind the fact that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist, did cause a lot of death. He was praised as an international hero. This is the British mainstream media press. President of the world. Look at this. You know, isn't this a communist? You know? Anyway. Words with manipulated concepts. Let's have a look at this, because we need to understand that these concepts are put upon us in order to manipulate us into believing and supporting our current system, okay, by making us believe that these concepts are in any way necessary, valuable, or beneficial to humanity, where in fact they are artificial constructs created for the purpose of malevolent intent, right? The term democracy, I was watching my dear beloved Sacha Stone last night on Face to Face, and he came up with some very interesting facts about democracy, and I thought I would give you one of the definitions he raised, which I wrote down. The incremental rise to the lowest common denominator. That was one of the definitions, the accurate definitions he gave. Mediocrity, lower the mediocrity. An incremental rise, the lowest common denominator. That is really the true meaning of democracy. Okay, we are taught that democracy means that we elect representatives, and those representatives in turn represent our interests. Okay, and therefore we get a say in the way the government is run. And in order to do that, we need to pay taxes, because we need to pay for these governments to be run. And we believe that in, you know, going to vote, we have a say in the way things get run, but really we don't. Technically, the definition of what we have in terms of the governments that rule the world under the guise of democracy is not democracy. They're polyarchies, because they're run by cabals of people who are indoctrinated or inculcated or invested in secret societies, which have clandestine intentions. And some of these intentions include eliminating and annihilating and extirpating people that don't comply with the Jesuit agenda. And things like communism were developed by the Roman Catholic Church. And as I said, and as concepts, not under the name communism, but developed as concepts long before we came to know them under the name of communism. The concept of communism was being practiced in South America 200 years before we learned the concept of communism, which was sold to us under the guise of socialism. Let's all live together, put everything we own together, and split it all equally. But so long as someone's always running that system, there's someone always skimming off the top, someone is always benefiting and leaving everybody else to suffer. And that's what happened with communism. The ideals of, you know, living together and us all of living in and sharing, that is a great concept. But whilst you still have a monetary-based system with central reserve banks, it's not a practical reality, okay? And then, of course, they give you the concepts of capitalism, you know. In an ideal world, if we had like true free market capitalism, the banks and how they have robbed people, they'd be brought to trial and held to account. But we don't. We have a society that by very definition is actually fascist, not capitalist. And we get sold things like national pride and patriotism and all that kind of bullshit brainwash malarkey, part of my language, but on all accounts. But really, patriotism and nationalism, these kind of concepts are sold to us in order to brainwash us into believing in the corporate identity we are sold of the land that we live in. For example, the Corporation of America, which America is in fact just a corporation. And it's the same as if I buy into a label. I, for example, may buy into Chanel. I use Chanel perfume, I got Chanel sunglasses, and if I'm lucky enough, I have the Chanel handbag, okay? It's very much the same. That's what nationalism and patriotism is. It's buying into the brand label of your country, because your country is nothing more than a corporation. And the label or branding attached to it is obviously the branding of, say, for example, America, which would then come with a flag, which would be the symbology attached to, the logo attached to the Corporation of the United States. And you invest into that brand identity emotionally. You believe in it, you stand behind it, you're willing to fight and die for it. Otherwise, how the hell would you get to send your kids off to fight and die in someone else's war? And this is how they're so, ooh, you got to be patriotic, you know, wave your flag at the parade, you know. And then they use terms like nationalism in dirty ways, and they say, oh, we're going to nationalize the mines. Let's nationalize the mines, and we give the mines back to the people. We nationalize them, and that means that, what does that mean really? Does that mean the people benefit from the minerals that are reaped from those mines? No. There's still some capitalist bugger somewhere, you know, reaping the benefits, and the poor people who are in the mines being underpaid, who, you know, when they strike, they get shot dead by the police. So, you know, nationalizing the mines. How did that turn out? No, the mass never benefited. However, when they talked about nationalizing the mines, what they really did was they messed them up. They really ran a few of them into the ground, polluted some of them, did horrible things to the mines they apparently nationalized. And they did this on purpose. They got us to think that nationalizing things was a dirty thing to do. We don't want to give things back to the people because, oh, what happens if they fuck it up and they destroy it? Well, no, those things were fucked up and destroyed on purpose so that we wouldn't want to give it back to the people to run. But I can tell you something now, that the majority of people that I know in my circles who do a lot better job of running countries or even, for example, mines or businesses than a lot of the clowns and monkeys you've got running governments today. And that brings us on to the economy, okay, which, again, it's inextricably tied into capitalism and nationalism, all right? The economy is a false thing, completely controlled. It's not a real thing. We can't touch it, we can't see it, we can't smell it, yet people talk about the economy like it controls absolutely everything. And what controls the economy is millions and millions of microtransactions that happen every day, which are deliberately done by people who want to control the ebbs and flows of the economy. Economic crashes are engineered. They're artificially generated. It's not like something happens in nature and suddenly the economy crashes. Okay, fair enough, given. If a meteor came and took out half the planet, it would affect the economy, but the economy doesn't exist anyway. And I think if a meteor took out the economy, that may not be a bad thing, you know. And with it, take out money, because money in itself is an artificial construct. And that is the mechanism of control through which we have all been controlled. And we get taught that, you know, money, you got to have money, you know, money makes your life, you need money to have a good life, money makes your life better, increases your standard of living. We get taught about money like it's a good thing. And now, is money a good thing? Again, depends on which percentage of the population you ask, because half the world's population lives on less than $2 a day. Do you think that they think money is a good thing? All right? Do you think they'd not rather be living outside of a system where they didn't need to trade pieces of paper in order to eat? And then, of course, religion. The biggest thorn in my side. You know, we've been put unlimited and unquestionable amounts of faith into the seemingly absurd, irrational, unrealistic, and improbable in the name of religion. All manner of things are acceptable in the name of religion. We've gone out, we've conquered, we've killed, we've raped, we've pillaged in the name of religion. Of all the words and concepts that we have been tricked into believing in and doing stupid things in the name of, I think religion probably has to be the biggest. And effectively, all of what we've mentioned here, all of this, all these words, just different brands of control. That is effectively all they are. They come across as things which are necessary and beneficial to us, but those words, they're just brands of control. The concepts they represent are concepts which are designed to control humanity. Now, these are words that are actually synonymous with control. Let's have a look at them. Okay, obviously mind control, the obvious one, hierarchy, enslavement, domination, suppression, poverty, war, sacrifice, ritual abuse. Now, all these things happen within the realm of these words. And yet you wouldn't necessarily, the ignorant or I'd say person still watching mainstream media wouldn't look at these words and think they had anything to do with these words, but they do. Because ultimately, all they're doing is one is referencing control overtly, which is this group of words references control overtly. This group of words references control subvertly or covertly. All right, guys, I think we have reached the end of Dragonology episode 8. Whew, that was an emotional one for me. It's always difficult getting onto my home territory because I really do feel for the people of Africa and long to return home every single day. It's been almost 6 years since I walked in African soil, and I guess one of the reasons why I've gone down this rabbit hole and engaged in all the studies of mythology and anthropology is really to understand my place in the world, being a white South African who's had to leave my country because of all the drama that's gone on there, and learning to understand, are we really guilty for what's happened there? Where does the blame lie, and what can we do to make it better? And that comes with understanding and breaking past the ignorance and the perceptions. And that comes with also breaking past the labels and the words, deconstructing the confusion of this reality and sharing that with everybody. And this, I guess, is largely a big part of what the Dragonology works are all about. Huge etymological research has gone into these, and it has to tie into a practical sense. And tonight we've taken it into the realms of the practical. And the more symbolic representatives and the individual breakdown elements are represented in the complete works of the Encyclopedia of Dragonology, which goes through almost every single dragon there is in the whole of history. So we're trying to get this project published. So if anyone wants to donate to that, please feel free. We're trying to get Dragonology, the Encyclopedia of Dragons, published. And the next episode of Dragonology, which is episode 9, will be on the 21st of May 2015, and we will be heading intensely into etymology again. Serpentine dragon etymology. We departed a little bit from it this evening, dove a little bit into it in the beginning, but really it was just to put things into a practical context, to understand why it's important to deconstruct the labels, deconstruct the words, deconstruct the symbols, understand what it all means. And studying the philology, the word science, the root, and of course, etymology meaning etymos, which means true, looking at the truth. Ultimately, Dragonology is a study of the truth that has happened, okay? Not the false history that we've been taught. And this is what it's all about for us here. So if you guys want to watch any of these episodes again, or you've missed any of the previous episodes, you're welcome to download a high definition copy of Dragonology from effiemarket.com. We now do HD downloads, which are available on effiemarket.com. And that is our new ethical marketplace where conscious consumers put all their wonderful media works, and we're going to be having lots of different interesting stuff popping onto Effie Market as well. So please, guys, do pop onto Effie Market and check out all the amazing HD shows that we've got now archived there. And of course, if you wish to view all of them, you're welcome to do so. And in so doing, become a pledger. €10 a month, get you unlimited access to all the CCN material in HD format on effiemarket.com. So please, guys, do become a pledger to free and independent media and help support us. Or you go to Conscious Consumer Network's homepage and click on the big red heart and hit the donate button. If you don't want to be a pledge and you just want to send us a donation, that's good too. And of course, that is consciousconsumernetwork.tv. And as always, we thank you for your time and attention this evening. We look forward to seeing you next week. That is all from me, Mel V. Until next week, see you later.
If you really had to make a difference on a large scale with minimal resources, how would you go about it? Have you ever dared to dream of doing that which seems impossible? On a planet steeped with corruption and destruction, the question beckons, how do we change it? Media has a far-reaching impact on people and has been used to manipulate humanity into our current destructive patterns. In order to affect people into moving into constructive patterns of behavior, we need to construct a new paradigm of media. Conscious Consumer Network has been created with the explicit intention of giving the amazing truth-seeking, solutions-orientated, alternative media a place to fully realize their true potential, with a cutting-edge, high-tech professional media platform being made available to use at no cost to the broadcaster. In turn, some of the greatest freedom-seeking hearts and souls of our time have realized the true potential of what has been created and have come together to provide their insight and inspiration on CCN. Conscious Consumer Network has become a unique, interactive information and educational network which provides a free-to-view, live-stream, ultra-high-definition channel to the world and features 25 live shows a week and growing with the addition of multiple language broadcasts. CCN has features comparable with mainstream media, such as being able to pause and rewind broadcasts whilst being live-streamed. Catch up on this or previous broadcasts, now available from CCN high-definition downloads. You can now purchase a high-definition download of your favorite CCN show from effiemarket.com. Support free and independent media by becoming a monthly pledger. This can be done with a monthly pledge of €10, which will allow you unlimited access to CCN's high-definition downloads, which hosts a back catalogue of over 250 shows, which have been aired since the launch of CCN on the 1st of January 2015. In order to keep CCN free of corporate sponsorship and advertising, CCN has launched the Pledge 300 campaign. This is a realistic goal with the hopes of securing a minimum of 300 people who will each pledge €10 a month. With this number, we can continue to grow and operate and potentially expand into a second foreign language channel. Without it, CCN will simply not be able to function without succumbing to corporate sponsorship and advertising. Help keep alternative media in the hands of the people. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.